So 7-step sourcing is what we as procurement consultants did back in the 1990s to achieve high savings with suppliers. And I believe it was originally conceived by Ignacio Lopez's team when he was the CPO of General Motors. So let me show you what 7-step sourcing is and join me on a hike in the parkland around Vienna. Come on. Hello, I'm Christian Schuh and this is Procurement in the Park. So the 7-step sourcing process started with determining a commodity profile. Sounds fancy, but what it really means is understanding who buys what from which supplier. And the most important task here was structuring the spend, so what the company buys, not in the way the company is structured, not division A, division B, or product A, product B, product C, but supplier 1, supplier 2, supplier 3. So it was very much shuffling around spend data in order to come up with something that we used to call a spend cube. And once you had your spend cube, the next step was selecting the right sourcing strategy. And in those days you had two types of sourcing strategies. You had the commercial strategies and you had the technical strategies. And selecting the right strategy in those days was very much dependent on your experience. And now as a pro tip, today you can select the right sourcing strategy using the purchasing chessboard. And I will leave a link below for you to learn more about the 64 strategies in the purchasing chessboard. So in those days, global sourcing was a super important and effective strategy. And remember, the mid-90s were the time before the internet. So companies didn't really know suppliers outside of their country. So typically German companies would buy in Germany, French companies in France, American companies in America. So bringing in suppliers from Eastern Europe, bringing in suppliers from China was really revolutionary and new. But even today, challenging the current supplier portfolio makes a lot of sense because very often companies are not buying from the right supplier. So I think there's still a lesson to be learned from the effort of global sourcing made back in the 1990s. So with all of this pre-work done, the next step was about determining the right implementation path. So essentially this was an opportunity and risk evaluation. So how much of the current practices were we ready to throw overboard and what did we need to preserve in order to stabilize the business. And by any means we did not want to promise anything to suppliers in subsequent steps that we would not be able to deliver. So next came determining the competitive price level. And I can tell you that in those days, negotiations typically were prepared far more diligently than today. So with the negotiations done, the next step was implementing this competitive price level. So this was relatively simple when we had leverage back with current suppliers, with incumbent suppliers. So this was in essence just putting the right prices into the SAP system. But when this was a supplier switch and global sourcing very often resulted in a supplier switch, this required some quite intensive testing and validation of the new supplier and of the new products. Now with the new suppliers qualified and the prices in the system, the final step was ensure the sustainability of these low prices. And that was done by maintaining competitive pressure on the suppliers. So this was the 7-step process as applied in the 1990s and early 2000s. You see, it is rather simple, a bit brutal, definitely a contact sport and not postal chess. Now I would like to hear from you old-timers who have been there in the 1990s, how procurement has changed in your perception since then. I would like to hear from all the students and beginners if anything that was up to date in the 1990s resonates with you today. Is there anything you can learn? Let me know down below, and I will get back to you within 24 hours. Thank you. Bye.